I haven't seen her in like months, I feel like.
Go ahead and resume the recording. So for today, we're going to move into chapter 2. Okay. And here. Swap that. All right. And so chapter 2 is, again, kind of that second link into operations, strategy, and management. And it's like a lot of your textbooks, right? Those first 2 chapters are just to kind of lay the groundwork and foundation for kind of what the text is about and the bigger picture of it. And when we hit chapter 3 on Thursday, we'll start to dive into the very specifics of how we break down a process. So chapter 1 was about understanding the process view of the organization, and then chapter 2 is about understanding that the strategic role that operations plays in a business. Okay, so generally speaking, we're going to talk about strategic positioning and operational effectiveness. We're going to spend time looking at how we link product attributes to process attributes. We're going to talk about business strategy in terms of markets and customers, and how linking operation strategy to that is critical for success. Okay, and again, those linkages are important. We're going to talk about maybe what different companies compete on, and understanding, okay, here's a company, here's what they compete on from a product standpoint, and here's what we think their processes should look like. And we're going to talk about what's called the operational frontier in a competitive product space. Okay, and so I don't expect you to understand what that means yet, but by the end of the class you should. 2.7, I forget the topic, 2.7, let me look real quick. I think, is it the history? The evolution of strategy and operations management. Dr. North and I have tried to take a hard look at what's taught in each of our courses and not spend time duplicating. So we talk about that in 343, so we're not going to cover that section here. And then 2.8 talks about service operations. Okay, so that's where we're headed today. So our first kind of concept is competitive product space. And so just definitionally, it's a representation of the firm's product portfolio, measured along the 4 product attributes: cost, response time, variety, and quality. Okay, and so I say see figure 2.1 in your text, and so I'm just going to hold that up. If you're online, you'll have to go look in your textbook. It's on page 22, and basically it's just a diagram that says, you know, we can put cost on the x-axis, and we can put pretty much any one of those other on the y-axis, response time, variety, in particular on that y-axis. And what we're going to see then is that there's some trade-offs that go along with that. Okay, so let's use, when we talk about competitive product space, let's use the airline industry as an example. Okay, and so I think it's interesting. Warren Buffett has a quote about the airline industry. He said, if a far-sighted capitalist had been present at Kitty Hawk, he would have done his successors a huge favor by shooting Orville down, right? Meaning that airline industry they've been through a number of bankruptcies. If you go back to the early 2000s in particular, several, like United went through bankruptcy more than one time. Right, and so investing in those industries and it was kind of a tough go. But there was one airline, in particularly in the 2000s, that was successful. Do you remember do you know which airline that was? So I think what we have: United, Delta, Southwest. So Southwest was the one that was probably the most successful. Okay, and we attribute their success to the fact that they were very specific about what their marketplace was, right? They weren't fancy, right? You didn't get, there's no, I don't think they have any first class, right? You just get your ticket, you get in line, and you get on the plane, right? And they stage how they have you get on the plane, so it's not a line, it's set up to be the most efficient way they know how to get everybody on the plane, which to me makes total sense, right? You would start loading from the back of the plane forward, and that way, you know, we let first class get on, and then business class on other airlines, and everybody else is standing waiting for them to get their luggage put up, right? And so they're very specific about how they go to do that. So Southwest has this atypical performance. In the 2000s, they've struggled a little bit since 2010 to now. I'm not sure where they're at. I'd have to go back and look. But So if we're talking about that time frame, they had generated, in the year 2009, they had generated 20 plus years of profits, right, which was very atypical for the airline industry. Their high was $645 million in 2000 to a low of $99 million in 2009. Okay. In comparison, United entered bankruptcy between 2003 and 2006 in order to restructure and be able to return to profitability. And Delta lost $9 million in 2008. So both carriers, both Delta and United, attempted to do what Southwest had done by creating this low-cost carrier. So Delta Express in 1996, to compete with low-cost carriers, it ceased operations in, I think, 2003. And then Delta established Song, another low-cost subsidiary, and was then reabsorbed back into Delta. And United set up low-cost, I don't even remember this one, it was called TED. And so then TED was supposed to be their kind of answer to Southwest. Okay? But it was, again, short-lived. Okay? And so we have to ask ourselves, well, how come Southwest is able to do this and United and Delta aren't, right? Okay, so there's some fundamental things that are going on with Southwest versus Delta and United, okay? So, again, those questions that we might ask ourselves about, well, what's different about Southwest strategy versus Delta and United's? So, how does their strategic positioning in the market affect their choice of business processes? Okay, so the second question, how can a company verify that its processes have the appropriate competencies to support the competitive strategy? So it's one thing to know what your competencies should be. It's another to, are we actually able to deliver those? And how can a company use the trade-offs inherent in process competencies, right, to its advantage when designing its business processes? So the first step is to understand what you're competing on. So if we're thinking about Southwest, and we think about the product attributes that we talked about in Chapter 1. So we said we had product cost, response time, variety, and quality. What was Southwest competing on product cost? Yes, they were, right? They were trying to be a low-cost carrier. Were they competing on response time? Yes, they were. Were they competing on variety? No, they weren't. They just tried to be in a particular market. This is what we do, okay? And were they competing on quality? So there's a base level of quality that has to be met, but I would say above and beyond that, that's not really their primary, right? And that's what you'll find a lot of times. There's kind of a baseline quality. So think, for example, McDonald's, right? We wouldn't necessarily say McDonald's is competing on quality, but we would say there's a baseline quality that they have to meet, right? So it's that same kind of approach, okay? So again, if we go back to that figure, we can, that 2-1 from the textbook, on the x-axis we can put cost, and then on the y-axis we can put time, variety, and quality, okay? Or you could think about it in terms of, if you were thinking about where you were going to compete, and you can think three-dimensionally, right? You can put, okay, where is this company going to compete on all of these different things? And we call that their product space, right? What is it that they're trying to compete on? Okay, so we've already agreed that we think Southwest is, well, no, we said we knew what, she can say it. We were talking about Delta, yeah, so we've already agreed what Southwest was competing on. So what do you think Delta and United were trying to compete on generally? So what are our four that we have? What are our four product attributes?
Cost, time, variety, quality.
Cost, time, variety, and quality. So what do you think United and Delta were competing on?
Quality.
Quality and probably variety, right? Is probably more where they have this range of flights that they're trying to satisfy, okay? That satisfy their customer needs, okay? And so Southwest then was focused on low cost and this reliable delivery, okay? And so if we think about why Southwest was successful, it's because they were able to really link their operational performance to where they wanted to be in the product space, right? And United and Delta were struggling to find, I think it's twofold. I think they were struggling to find that match, and then I think maybe the airline industry was becoming more commodity-like as opposed to, industries change over time. And so most of us shop now for flight cost, right? There are people that are really dedicated to certain airlines, but most of us look around and we can shop across a range of carriers, and we're looking for cost. And so where they were strategically wanting to position themselves in the marketplace was becoming a weakened position. And so then how do they react to that, right? And I'll give you the example in the window and door industry. That's what happened as well, right? At one point in the 60s and 70s, having wood windows was considered kind of something that you had to have if you were going to have a high-end custom home, right? In today's environment, they make vinyl and alternative material windows and doors that are just as nice as, or considered just as nice as wood windows. And the other side of it is wood windows can have wood rot and have some issues with it, right? And you go with this other material and it doesn't. And so their market space changes, right? You have to be aware of that. And so then if that's the case, then you have to adopt your operation strategy and your marketing position, right, to match what's happening out there in the industry if you're going to continue to be successful. Okay? So we say operational effectiveness is possessing the process competencies that support your strategic position. So one, you need to have the right strategic position. And two, you have to have the operational processes in place to be able to support that. Okay? Lots of information on one slide. Okay. Now we talk about this in 343, the difference between operational effectiveness and operational efficiency. Okay. So effectiveness is saying that you have the process competencies that support that given strategic position. Okay. It is not the same as operational efficiency. Operational efficiency means you're doing what you're doing at the lowest cost available to you. Right. It doesn't mean that you're the lowest cost overall. It means for whatever your process is, you've taken the cost out of it and you're doing it effectively, okay? You're doing it efficiently, okay? So efficiently is about, are you doing it at the lowest cost that you can? Effectiveness is, are you doing the right things, okay? So if I'm McDonald's and I hire a custom, or a chef, right, to be in the kitchen, right, that's probably not very either effective or efficient because it doesn't meet the requirements of where we're at with the strategic position. If I'm McDonald's and I have set up where we have labor that has defined roles and that we're able to move product through and get it to our customers quickly because they compete on time, right, we would say they were effective. If they'd set up operational policies and things to do that at the lowest cost possible, we'd say they were also efficient. So we have effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness is driving, are you doing the right things? And efficiency is when you're doing those things. And it's not even, if you can be efficient, you can be doing something efficiently, but it might not be the right thing, right? And so basically you're still not going to arrive in the right place. So I could be doing something, I could be thinking that, so as an example, in the window and door industry, I could be thinking that producing things, minimizing my offering, and producing at low cost, right? I could be thinking, well, that's the right thing for me to do, and I could do that efficiently. But if I've missed the mark, and really the marketplace has changed, and I haven't moved with it, I can be efficient, but I'm not being effective because I'm not tying to what the marketplace needs. Okay? So again, you need to make sure that you're on board with the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Okay? So when we think about where we're going to position ourselves, right, we need to think about, well, what strategy are we going to take? All right? So there is a strategy hierarchy. You have a corporate strategy that defines the scope of each division or business unit in terms of the attributes of the products that it will offer on the market segment that it will sell. So I always like to think of like a big business when I think about these three different, right? Think about GE, right? They have a lot of different businesses, right? And so they have to decide overall, what's our overall business, what's our overall corporate strategy? And then once we've decided on what our corporate strategy is, then within each of those businesses, we have to define the scope of each division in terms of its attributes and the products that will the products and the market segments that it will serve. And then within that business, right, we have functional strategies inside that business. And that's our marketing, our operations, and our finance are the three main functions in most organizations. Okay? So if we think down to that functional, right, marketing identifies and targets the customers that the business unit wants to serve, right, the products that it must supply in order to meet customer needs, and the competition it will face in the marketplace. Operations designs, plans, and manages the processes through which the business unit supplies its customers with products. Okay? Operation strategy configures and develops business processes that best enable a firm to produce and deliver the products. And then finance acquires and allocates the resources needed to operate that business process. Okay? Operations is responsible for developing or acquiring the necessary process competencies. Okay? So now we're going to move from product attributes to process competencies. Okay? And so we would say then the process competencies that operations can have control over are process cost, flow time, flexibility, and quality. Okay? Process cost, process flow time, process flexibility, and process quality. And then your operation strategy focuses on the process competencies that are required to produce and deliver tied to what your product attributes that you're looking for in the marketplace. Okay? All right. So business strategy versus operation strategy. Okay? Business strategy is concerned with selecting the external markets and what products you want to supply them to. Operation strategy is concerned with the design of those internal processes and interfaces between the input and the output markets. Okay, so examples. A business strategy that focuses on product cost as a top competitive priority. Right. So if my product attribute that I'm competing on is cost in the marketplace, in the operations side of it, I need to be focused on efficient and lean business processes, right? That's what I'm driving for in my facility, okay? So an example, Zara. How many of you have heard of Zara as an example? They are a Spanish apparel retailer, and a few years ago they were all over the news because they had this new concept of how to deliver fashion to the marketplace. Okay, and what they did is they recognized that from the time that the shows on the runway, if they could beat the competitors to create the knockoffs of those and get them into the marketplace, right? That was going to be a really key place for them to be because fashion turns pretty quickly. And there's a lot of risk inherent in if you buy too much of the wrong thing, then you're stuck with it. So if they were able to find a way to meet orders quickly and at smaller quantities, right, they'd be a winner in the marketplace. And that's what they did. And so what they did is they set up around the globe different suppliers of things like the material, of things like the factories where they could be sewn, right? And they set up contracts with these organizations, okay? And so they were able to then, they weren't stuck, like the model before them was, here we are, we're going to get orders, okay? And this is who I use to produce those orders, right? And what they did is they went, here we are, we're going to get orders, and we have all these different options. Okay, so this might be my material suppliers, this might be my manufacturers, right? And I can mix and match my material suppliers and my manufacturers, and I'm able to deliver things much quicker to the marketplace in a much smaller way. Okay? And so they found this way to operationally deliver what that marketplace was requiring. McDonald's, their product attributes, we would say, was low cost, consistent quality, and quick delivery, right? That's what they're competing on. So their process attributes to match that, so low cost, they need a low cost process, okay? Consistent quality, they need a repeatable process, okay? And then if they're going to compete on quick delivery, they have to be flexible, right, to be able to ramp up production. So if you think about a McDonald's, they operate very differently at 2 o'clock in the morning than they do at noon, right? They have different amounts of people there in order to be able to deliver in terms of that time frame. Okay, so the whole discussion here is to make sure that we're making that connection that we have to tie what we're competing on in the marketplace to what we're doing operationally, right? We have to know here's what our product attributes are, and then operationally, our job is to say, and here's how we're going to deliver to be able to meet those. Okay? So, in terms of those process competencies, okay, how do we link those to those product attributes? If we're saying that we compete on low cost, from a process standpoint, we want to focus on efficient and lean business processes. If we say we're going to compete on high quality, we need to make sure that our process can deliver high quality with precision equipment, right? If we're saying we're going to compete on variety, we have to have flexibility in our business processes, and we can build that in a number of ways. You can do it like McDonald's, where they can flex up or flex down with their workforce, or if you have something that is a storable product, you can build that flexibility in by having, I'm thinking about the shorter response times, okay? So that flexible business process to produce a variety of things. And we'll talk about the specifics of that in a little bit, but basically what we say there is, I may not invest in a lot of capital equipment if I need high variety, because I can train my people to be the flexible piece of that, right? If I invest in capital equipment that has very specific uses, then I've spent all my money over here, and I don't have the ability to flex that into something else, okay? In terms of short response times, again, this is where I was thinking of the McDonald's, right? What they do is they flex more people into their operation, or they take people out, depending on what their volumes are. From a manufacturing standpoint, you can create inventory if it's an inventoriable product, right? And so then you don't have to flex your people up and down. If you don't have an inventoriable product for either it's perishable, right, or you have so much variety that you can't pick the right SKUs in stock to match the marketplace, you again have to go with people. And you have to bring more people in when you need to flex up, or you have to work overtime, weekends, that kind of a thing, okay? So again, what are you competing on in the marketplace, and what process competencies do you have, okay? So if you're trying to design your operation strategy and structure, right, you start with your business unit strategy. Typically, you would start with your business unit strategy, then determine what your desired competencies are, and then tie those into your processes, your operation structure, and your resources, okay? I think it's interesting and true that in today's environment, it's not necessarily top-down only, right? Sometimes you have to understand what you do well and how can you drive that back up into the marketplace, right? And so it's a two-way street now. It's not just a one-way street. There's a gentleman by the name of Terry Hill that wrote, well, he's got several papers, and then they transferred that into a whole textbook on manufacturing strategy. And he does such a great job of emphasizing this linkage between what happens in the marketplace and what you need to do in terms of your operation strategy. Okay, this next slide to me is, he has a whole paper on this particular issue, and basically, and a whole chapter in the textbook that he's written. Okay, and so all we're going to do is look at it at a high level and make sure that we understand, if you are in this product space today and you want to move to this product space, it's not as simple as just saying, so for example, when we did Proline windows, and we did, 13 or 15 sizes and 3 colors, and we said, okay, now we want to move up to all kinds of different sizes and all kinds of different colors. You don't just do that and not adjust operationally to meet those needs, okay? And so what you have to do is you have to say, here's where we're at today, right? And here's what our existing capabilities are, right? And here's where we want to be tomorrow, and here's what we need to do. And our engineering teams would make plans to how are we going to get from here to here, okay? So the example that I like to use on that is we had a size restriction up to 29 inches wide, okay? And our marketing people came to us and said, we want you to offer a window that's 35 inches wide, okay? And you would think, not a big deal, right? We'll just make a wider window. Except all of the sash presses and all of the frame presses had restrictions of 31 inches wide. Okay? And those sash presses were $150,000 a piece. And oh, by the way, we have 10 production lines. Okay? So that's $1.5 million to say, let's go from 29 to 35 inches. Right? And so if the marketing people are only in and they make that decision, they're probably making it and not understanding what does that mean cost-wise, right? And so you have this conversation and you say, okay, let's start out and we'll do a shorter offering and we'll transition to production lines to be able to do 35 inches wide, okay? And then, you know what? Those sash presses are going to wear out. That's just a given, right? Over time, they're going to wear out. So as they wear out, we'll replace them with ones that are capable, right? So you come up with this conversation that says, how do we move from where we're at to where we need to be in a reasonable way that offers what the marketplace needs, but doesn't kill us in terms of this capital investment? Okay, so again, you're trying to then, you're doing this comparison of here's where we're at, here's where we want to be, and you have to have those deliberate discussions because these things can happen over time just because the marketplace keeps, you know, like I said, the ProLine window was originally meant to be X number of sizes, 3 colors, and at the end of the day, I think I worked in the ProLine plant for 4 years, and we went from that to, you can, up to, I think it was an 1/8 inch increment. You can have whatever size you want. You can have whatever color you want. And we had limited glass sizes, and we went to you can have whatever glass you want, right? And that really changes from a production line what you're offering versus what we initially offered over here to what we needed to be over here. And so our goal was, how can we make this new look as close to this so we don't add a bunch of complexity into our production line? Okay. One of the ways we did that was we kitted everything. So as an operator, all I had to do was go, I'm on window 1, I'm taking window 1 from here, window 1 from here, window 1 from here, and I'm putting it together, right? So we tried to take that kind of decision-making away from the operator and bring it to them kitted. But kitting things has a cost to it, right? So you have to recognize kind of where you're going there. All right? So key conditions for process effectiveness is the existence of that strategic fit among the 3 main components, your strategic position, your process architecture, which we're going to spend some time talking about, and your managerial policies, right? So, and to be clear, and I think I've talked about it, there is no permanent state of strategic fit, and it moves more rapidly today than it did. I think, in the 60s and 70s, you could kind of think you had a game plan for the next 10 years. We don't get to think that way anymore, okay? So as an example, Dell's initial focus was to increase product variety and customization while keeping product costs low and delivery response time and quality acceptable. Like, I can remember in the 2000s going out to the Dell computer site and being so excited that I could pick exactly what I wanted my computer to be, right? That was a big thing. Well, it's not nearly such a big thing now, right? And their response to that need in the marketplace was designed around a direct sale to the customer with a lean and responsive assemble to order. So they had the components already done, and when I would order my computer, they'd go, I'm getting this, I'm getting this, I'm getting this, we're putting them together, and we're sending them out. Wasn't start from scratch, because we've already got the components. But over time, that hardware became more of a commodity, right? And customer priority shifted from variety, this customization, to low cost. So they had to shift their product focus, and then they had to shift their operational focus to sell through retail stores like Walmart. Right now, you can go to Walmart and buy your Dell computer instead of just direct. You can still go direct, but they have it through Walmart. And they outsourced some of that assembly to third parties to keep that cost low. Right? That was how they hit that. Okay. A market-driven strategy versus a process-driven strategy. Okay. This, I'll just tell you, this will be an exam question, so make sure that you understand the difference between the two. Okay. A market-driven strategy says a firm starts with what are my key competitive priorities and then develops the processes to support them. Okay. And then a process-driven strategy is where you start with what is it that we do well and how can we sell that in the marketplace. All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. in general, strategic fit requires both market and process-driven strategies. The resulting view of strategic fit is it inextricably links a company's internal competencies, what it does well, and its external industry environment, what the market demands and what competitors offer. So producers of commodity products tend to be market-driven. Okay? On the other hand, technologically innovative companies tend to drive markets, meaning if I develop a new technology, I go to the marketplace and figure out where I can sell it, right? So as an example, Apple has had remarkable success using its design competency and an intimate understanding of the customer. Okay, so Apple can be one of those that's considered to kind of tell us what we want next, right? We don't necessarily always tell Apple this is what we want. They offer it, and we tend to like it. eBay and Google are examples of service providers whose technological innovations drove the online auction and search markets. Okay. Even though the origin of those examples was a technological innovation, ultimate success depends upon meeting a customer need effectively with their underlying operations. Okay? eBay used that technology to make running an auction quicker. Google made search quicker and cheaper, and Facebook has made connecting with others more convenient. Okay? The example that I like to use to kind of bring this home is, so market-driven strategy says, I recognize that there's a product out there in the marketplace that either doesn't exist today and I want to do it, or they don't do it as well as what they could, and I'm going to go after it. Okay? The process-driven strategy to me is, let's say I run a golf course, okay? And so what are some of the skill sets, what do I need to be able to run the golf course well? What resources do I need to have? What are they spending their time on?
The land needs to be like flat or like the right land.
So it has to be, so they have to have land, and how do they keep it up? What do they have to do? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Lots of landscaping.
Landscaping, what else? Mowing, right? Trimming, right? So again, I'm running a golf course, and as a process, I've got these resources that are really good at mowing, trimming, and landscaping, right? So maybe a process-driven strategy might be, oh, and by the way, I also understand how to fertilize, and I understand how to use chemicals to control weeds, right? Well, maybe a process-driven strategy would say, not only am I going to run this golf course, but I'm going to have a lawn care business over here, right? Because those things tie together. I already do this well. Where else can I take it to the marketplace, right? That's what we're thinking about with a process-driven strategy. Okay? A market-driven strategy says, I recognize there's a need in the marketplace, and I'm going to develop the processes to meet that need. A process-driven strategy says, I already have these processes that I do well. How can I exploit that in the marketplace in other ways? Okay? All right. So now we're going to talk about inside a facility, and think of manufacturing first, and we'll work on service later. It's easier to think about this in terms of manufacturing. So if we talk about focused operations, no single process can perform well on every dimension. So no single process can do cost, quality, delivery, and flexibility. You can't do all of those. It just doesn't work. So according to Michael Porter, choosing a strategy, therefore, involves focus. The essence of strategy is what to do and what not to do. What is it that you're not competing on? Okay? So a focus strategy is committing to a limited, congruent set of objectives in terms of demand and supply, and making sure that you have the right inputs, process technologies, and volumes to tie together. That approach concentrates on serving a limited market segment with business processes specifically designed and operated to meet their needs. So let me give you the example of why we say that matters. Okay. I started out with Pella in the custom plant, and I had a group of 15 people that worked for me, and they made Architect Series custom windows. Okay, we did some cool ones. There was Randy Travis ordered a window from us one time, and it had like a man with a guitar and the mutton bars, right? And so, I mean, these people are artists that are doing these mutton bars. And so to do the mutton bars on a window like this, you have a wood set that goes on the inside, you have foam that is in between the glass, and you have metal on the outside, and all three of those have to match, right? So you think about the complexity of a design of a man with a guitar, right? What does that look like, okay? And so, you know, it was not atypical, and we didn't have a ton of windows like that, but it wasn't atypical for someone to spend 2 days making the mutton pattern to work on a window like that. I mean, it's art is what it is, okay? On the other hand, we have, kind of on the other end of this spectrum, we have the Murray vinyl window plant, right? And their cycle time or tack time on a window, how quickly do they have a window coming off the end of the production line, is every 70 seconds, right? And so you think about if we tried to have the custom window person here and the every 70-second person here, right? Those are two very different types of operations. And so having them work next to each other creates inherent conflict, right? Because these people think these people suck. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And there is that whole, you know, we produce the best, right? It's we're artists, we're this, you know, they're pretty proud of what they do. And these people are like, right, but we make money through volume and we're damn good at what we do. Right? So you've got these two kind of prides going on that are completely in contrast to each other. And it creates some interesting dynamics in terms of organizations when you have that broad. And so we're going to talk about how, if you do that within a company, an approach that you can take. But having a focused strategy is important. Okay? So a focused strategy means that you have a focused process. One's products fall within a small region of the competitive product space. What we opted to do is have a custom plant, and that's all they did was custom windows. We opted to have a vinyl plant. That's all they did is vinyl windows. And then in between, we had a wood window and door plant that did a couple of different product lines, but they were pretty close together. They had Architect Series and Designer Series, right? And so they were close enough together that they were able to be within the same facility. If the product portfolio is more dispersed in the competitive space, then the process will also be less focused. Okay. How you can deal with that is, again, having individual plants to say we're going to divide that and keep those people separate. Just as an example of how they're different. So I started in the custom plant, and I had 15 people in the Architect Series very custom shapes, right? And then I had 30 people that did Architect Series custom windows, and we would do maybe 100 a day, right? This group would do somewhere between 15 and 30 a day, depending on the complexity. This group would do 100 a day, okay? And I shared a process engineer and a product engineer and a maintenance technician and another guy that just helped support my 45 people. And I shared them with one other area in the plant. And then I moved to Story City, and I went to a plant that had, I think they had about 600 people working for them, right? And we went and we had I still had a maintenance guy. So over here I also had a maintenance guy. I no longer had the maintenance guy, and my engineering, my product engineer, and my process engineer that I had half of one all the time over here. I now have one main one for like 3 different production lines. So right, so your resources get spread thin. Then I moved to the vinyl plant, right? And oh, by the way, we have one product engineer and one process engineer for the entire plant, and there are no maintenance technicians on any production line, right? And so again, those resources are very different depending on, if I'm competing on cost over here, right? I can't afford to have much fat in this system. And all the way over here on the custom side, I can afford to have those resources. So my advice to you is if you get the chance to work in a custom plant or a vinyl plant, go for the custom. That's where the money's at, right? And there's more things that can be done there. And it's very interesting to have moved across all 3 of those different divisions and see how that cost structure changes, okay? But so let's go back to just the generic, if you're going to have a focused strategy and a focused process. One of the examples that you'll see used in the literature is something called the Aravind Eye Clinic, okay? And what they do is they are in Madurai, India, okay? They do 300,000 cataract operations, okay? So that's all they focus on. And their focus is high quality and low price. They don't do anything else but these cataract operations, okay? Another example is Aldi. How many you guys heard of Aldi? So they're an international retailer specializing in a limited assortment of private label, high quality products at the lowest possible prices. Okay, so they have a lean operating structure with emphasis on frugality and simplicity that yields a very low cost structure. Okay. All right. Or you can have broad market segments, but use this focused strategy. So that's what Pella did, but they kept individual plants. If you can't afford to have individual plants, then you do something called a plant within a plant. And you divide your plant physically and say this is the custom side and this is the vinyl side, right? So if you think about hospitals with separate emergency rooms, right, that's a very different process than what happens on a regular hospital floor, okay? And again, I've already kind of given the example of Pella windows and doors. We did talk about, though, with United, they tried a plant within a plant approach by using that TED, right, saying we're going to have this new resource that we're going to use. And that didn't work for them because they actually had such a hard time. They couldn't keep their resources separate. Like what would happen is they'd have planes identified and then they'd have issues come up. And then they transferred planes that were not supposed to be in the TED into the TED. So, the TED planes were all supposed to be these smaller, more fuel efficient, right? And then what would happen is they'd have some type of scheduling issue and they'd use a plane that wasn't a TED plane, and so then they lose their low cost advantage, okay? So they had trouble with crossover of the crews, crossover of the equipment, and then their passengers were confused, okay? So they weren't able to satisfy those business travelers who then expected TED to be like United, and that was not ever the intent of TED, okay? All right. So in production and operations management, I know you're not going, like this should come up with a big blow and this whole, right? This is back in 1979, Hayes and Wheelwright came up with this kind of overall concept. And the concept says that basically for what you're trying to produce, there is a process that matches it, right? And so if we identify the different types of processes, okay, and so we can say continuous flow, line flow, batch, and job shop. So those of you that had 343, we talked about that in 343, right? The different types of line flows. So just to kind of refresh your memory, if we're talking about continuous flow, think about something that like an oil refinery. It starts and it just doesn't stop. It's going all the time, okay? For line flow, think about an auto assembly, right? Think about the vinyl windows at Pella windows and doors. It's the every 70 seconds, I've got these things to do. For batch, right, heavy equipment or auto repair, right? Meaning we're still attempting to do things, kind of grouping them together, but we have more of a custom environment. Like, I think there's more variety, okay? And then for a job shop, it's it's a very custom environment. Think about a commercial printer, right? I'm doing a specific job for a specific customer. Think about an architect firm. I'm creating a set of plans that are specific to a customer, okay? And so across the bottom, we have product variety. And up the right, we have process flexibility. So our continuous flows typically have low product variety and low process variability. We're doing the same thing all the time. And as we move up the diagonal, right, then we get higher product variety and higher process flexibility, okay? What research has shown us is that if you have a match between your process flexibility and product variety and the type of process that you're using, you're more profitable, right? So it matters to pick the right process for what you're trying to accomplish. You have some that might be off the diagonal, and we we see today that coming off the diagonal, you can have technology that's actually going to allow you to do that, right? The more tech. So, for example, we have line flows, right? But if we have higher product variety over here, what we can do is we have some paint lines now that are able to really switch over and do custom paint, and it acts as though there's not any difference than how we do it when it goes down the production line, right? So again, but off the diagonal typically costs more money, right? On the diagonal says you're where you need to be. Okay. So for those different types of processes that we just talked about, project, job shop, batch, line flow, and continuous, okay? I guess we only had these four on the diagonal. Project is typically the one where you take the resources to it. Think of building a custom home. You go out and build the custom home. Think of a shipyard. You take your resources to the shipyard. That's when we're talking project. That's what we're talking about. Okay. Line flow and continuous flow, we typically use a flow shop architecture. We try to get to where this is my production line, and every 70 seconds I'm doing something, and we're moving that product down. That's what when we say flow shop. Job shop, on the other hand, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I have a group of resources. Maybe I have like 5 or 6 drills over here. Maybe I have some lathes over here. Maybe I have some welding equipment over here. And I'm going to move my product through in a batch, and I'm going to take it here, and I'm going to use some of these drilling machines, and they're going to do all 100 at once, and then we're going to move it to the next station, and they're going to do all 100 at once, and we're going to move it to the next station. Okay? So that's when we say job shop environment. It's typically more what we're looking at. There are some characteristics that go with that. Okay? So if we think about job shop, batch, and flow shop, right? I want you to think about these categories, and you're going to help me fill in the blanks here. And they typically move from lower to higher on each of these. Okay? So if I were to say product volume, do you think a job shop, a batch, or a flow shop would do more product volume or less? Which would do more and which would do less? Flow shop would be more, right? And so it's going to move from higher to lower, right? I'm going to have more to less. How about specialized equipment? Where am I going to have more specialized equipment?
Job shop.
Job shop.
Okay. And why do you think that?
It's customized.
Okay. So I understand why you think that, but that's not right. Okay, and here's why. Because in a flow shop, I'm doing the same thing again and again and again and again. So I can afford to invest in equipment to do that very specific thing. And in a job shop, I need this drill to be able to do a bunch of different things. And so it's got to have the flexibility, and it's my operator who's got to have the training to be able to set that up differently. Okay? So specialized equipment, you have more specialized equipment in a flow shop because you're only doing that one thing on that production line. Okay? So that's what makes it more specialized. How about product variety? Which one is going to have more? Job shop, right? More flexibility, more variety, less variety. How about machine setup frequency? Meaning how often I have to change over that machine to do something else?
Job shop.
Job shop has more to flow shop. How about labor skills? Where do I need more labor skills versus less labor skills?
Job shop.
Right. These people have to be more skilled than these people. And if so, again, think of that. Think custom plant in Shenandoah, vinyl plant here in Murray. It's not that the people are any better or any worse. We just have different needs from those people. Okay. How about variable costs? Where am I going to have higher variable costs?
Job shop.
Job shop, right? Because my labor is more expensive, right? And here, so on that flip side, my capital costs are going to be higher in which one? Capital costs, where I need specialized equipment.
Flow shop.
Flow shop, right? So again, right? What time is it? I didn't put my watch on.
10:20.
10:20. Okay, so we're so good. We're coming down. I think I got about 5 or 6 more slides to go through, so we're coming down. So when we think about a job shop, so what they're showing us here is I've got product 1, and it's coming into the drills, right? And it's and when I have product 1, I'm probably doing however many I have in that batch, okay? and I'm doing it all here, and then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here. Okay? And then in terms of this example, in terms of the flow shop, right? If I'm going to go A, D, and B, I'm going to do, in the perfect world, you do one unit here, and then it moves to here, and then it moves to here. And so what we say in a flow shop is we're trying to get to one-piece flow, okay? And in a job shop, you can kind of start to transition by making smaller batch sizes if you're starting to see more volumes. But you have to decide, again, what makes sense for where you're at in the marketplace, okay? So, that being said, if I have a make-to-stock environment, do I want a job shop or a flow shop process?
Flow.
Flow, because I want to do as quick as I can. Okay? If I have a make-to-order, am I more likely to have a job shop or a flow shop?
Job.
Job shop, right? Okay. All right. So this focus in the frontier. One of the things that my research that I've been doing is we've been using DEA, which is called Data Envelopment Analysis. Okay, that's really what this picture is showing us is how DEA looks at things. Okay, and so what we're saying with this frontier is, so this is the frontier here. Okay, and on one side I have responsiveness, right, on one axis, and on the other I have cost efficiency. Okay, and basically on the frontier are those organizations that are making the best utilization of their resources. Okay, and you have choices, right? I can be the best emergency room out there, right? And I'm going to be very responsive, but my cost efficiency, that's not what an emergency room is about. You don't want them to be about that. You want them to be about saving lives, right? On the other side of it, I could have a world-class non-emergency hospital that has very high cost efficiency, that's probably a little less, it is less responsive, okay? And what we say typically in data envelopment analysis in this approach is anybody that's on this frontier is doing the best in class, okay? And you have a lot of people that are out in here, okay? And so their comparison would be, here's where I'm at today, and I want to be here, or I want to be here, and what is it that I need to do to change, what do I need to change to move myself there? So, for example, when I use data envelopment analysis, we take the inputs of cost, quality, delivery, and flexibility, right, and put that into, how much labor do you use, right, to get at cost, right? What product variety do you have, right? And so we use those inputs, and then we compare that to where they say they are in their industry in terms of their cost. How profitable are they? Okay, and so then I divide those plants into best in class, worst in class, and we start to try to understand, well, what drives, those companies that are best in class, what characteristics do they have that are in worst in class? And so you're talking worst in class, right, and best in class. Okay, and so that frontier is just saying, again, there isn't a right or a wrong, right? This position isn't worse than this position. It's just different. And you have to choose where you want to be and how you're going to compete. Okay? All right. I think to be very specific, so the operations frontier is the smallest curve, and that's that outer curve, that contains all current industry positions. So it represents the best practices of world-class firms. Because the curve represents those firms holding the highest combinations of responsiveness and cost efficiency with whatever industry you're reviewing. Those firms that aren't on the operational frontier can determine their competitive position relative to those firms that are. And then you have the trade-offs, because the operations frontier is typically concave. Any point on the frontier represents a trade-off. So to increase performance along one product dimension, one must give up some performance along the other. This frontier typically only changes when you see real changes in technology, right? And that can move where that curve actually exists. Okay? So Improvements in operational effectiveness bring a company closer to that frontier or move the frontier itself along the direction of improvement specified by the strategic position. So as your technology and management practices advance, that operations frontier can shift outward or away from the point of origin in that competitive space. Therefore, if you're a world-class firm, you can't just assume that you're always going to be world-class, right? You have to be, you can't rest on your laurels, okay? So the internet is an example of a technology that's changed the operating frontier for many organizations in terms of how they're able to be more efficient. Okay? So we're going to finish off looking at the opportunity today in service operations, and then we're going to talk about a couple of quick discussion questions. So the growth of the internet and telecommunications has, again, transformed some things that happen in service operations. So I don't know that we have it here, but there are some McDonald's that have remote order takers. So as you drive up to your to place your order, you may not be talking to someone inside that building. You can be talking to someone else. They're able to transfer that to where they have openings in terms of people available to answer those, right? So that's an example of how technology has changed. You know, if McDonald's needs to be able to flex up and they've got places where they have people that aren't that busy, they can transfer that around. Aravind Eye Hospitals, so those medical technicians man remote sites while ophthalmologists diagnose using a video conferencing link. So again, and you'll hear about that a lot in terms of remote countries, some in Africa, right? You can't afford to have really experienced doctors in remote areas of Africa. There's not enough population, but technology allows us to share what they find, what the physician finds there, and send it to someone who is a specialist that can then give them those responses. Okay, so so again, in both those cases, technology has been able to improve their process performance. All right, if I'm you, I would take a few minutes at some point to review that summary on page 41, and then let's go ahead and talk about discussion questions 2.4 and 2.8 real quick. Shouldn't take us too long. So 2.4. So there's a small printed circuit board manufacturer that's established itself on the ability to supply a large variety of small orders in a timely manner. So what are they competing on? Okay, in a timely manner, and they say a circuit board manufacturer has established itself on the ability to supply a large variety, so variety and time, okay? So then a firm approaches the manufacturer to place a large order equal to the current volume from all other orders, okay? But it asks for a 30% discount. Do you think the circuit board manufacturer should accept the order, and why or why not?
I feel like they should still accept it if they're like what they're making is more than what it's going to cost.
Okay, so there's gets to be the MBA answer, right? It depends. That's always the MBA answer, right? So it depends on whether or not do they have the capacity, right? And then two, is the 30% above their cost, okay? Let's say that that's going to require them to turn down other orders. Then what do you think they should do?
No.
No. And why?
Because if the other orders don't ask for a discount, then why would they go below their...
And I think there's a real risk that do you think given that we know that they compete on variety and time, do you think they're a job shop or a flow shop?
A flow shop.
Okay, they compete on variety and time.
Job shop.
Probably more likely a job shop. We don't know that for sure, but probably more likely to be a job shop because they have to do a lot of different things, okay? So they have to do a lot of different things, and now someone comes along and says, I want you to do all of one thing, right? Their setup isn't really in a good place for them to be able to say, okay, well now I'm going to move to a flow shop and I'm going to do everything kind of more of that one-piece flow. So that's kind of when you start to look at how are we going to compete, those are some things to think about. And in terms of whether or not you should take those kinds of orders. The bottom line question is it profitable and do they have the capacity? We don't have the answers to those. But what I want you to be thinking about is, what does that mean in terms of what their current production probably looks like, and why is that not a fit, right? And there'll be marketing people that won't understand that, right? Because the marketing group is going to be like, we got this great order, right? And so the other thing that I always try to get across to people is, how do you get marketing and operations on the same page? So marketing is oftentimes bonused on their sales volume, right? And operations is oftentimes bonused on controlling costs, right? And so you inherently set up this butting of heads, because if I'm marketing, I want you to produce bigger, better, more, right variety, because that lets me sell more. And if I'm operations, I don't want to do anything more because that adds cost to my business, okay? So how you get them on the same page is you bonus both of them off of profit, right? And that changes the dynamics of the conversation. So if we're competing off of profit and marketing brings up this order and I can look at it and say it is going to add profit, yeah, let's do it because we're all going to get bonused on that, right? So company structure, depending on if you're bonused in operations on cost and your marketing people are bonused on sales volume, it just sets up this let's butt heads over that, okay? I have decided that 2.8 is way too long, that I don't want to read that at this moment, so we're going to bypass that one. But you have, in your discussion questions on Canvas, you're going to be answering 2.1, 2.7, and 2.9. My guess is, and I'll encourage you to do this, and also tell you this wouldn't have been me when I was you. If you go do it today, you'll remember more of our conversation. Those will be pretty easy and straightforward to answer. They're not hard ones, but I just want to kind of reiterate some of the concepts that we talked about today. So that's all I've got for you today. We will see you back here on Thursday, and we'll start in on Chapter 3. Okay? But for those of you that haven't got your Chapter 1 stuff done, you want to get that done before Wednesday night.